Today is Monday, and I promised a subscriber of mine that I'd fix up his neglected GSXR 600 by Wednesday.
This is Calvin, and he recently went from a KTM 390 Duke to this 2007 Suzuki GSXR 600.
Because like every good man, he wanted more horsepower. But by the looks of it, this Gixxer has been neglected for quite a few years.
The front brake lever goes back to the handlebar. The handling's been destroyed by lowering it, and it desperately needs a service.
And those are just a few of its issues. There are a lot of signs of sketchy mechanics working on this bike in the past. So I figured it was time to add another sketchy mechanic to the list. Me. Because I struggle to shy away from a bike that needs some TLC. But the biggest challenge is actually going to be time. You see, Calvin uses this bike every day. So I promised to have it back to him by Wednesday, which gives me just 3 days to do my best on this Gixxer. I'm not even sure if that's enough time to make Gixxer jokes, but I guess I could ask around the male strip club to save time. Now, it's a bit of a weird story, but the other day I got a tattoo from Calvin, and when I showed up for the appointment, it turned out he was a subscriber. So he showed me his new to him GSXR 600.
I have a bit of a soft spot for these Gixxers because this model was actually my first big boy bike when I turned 18.
But it's quickly apparent that this Gixxer needs some love. Calvin, however, lives in an apartment with nowhere to work on his bike. I don't think he has much experience working on bikes either, and I'm not even sure if he owns any tools to work on bikes. But he told me that it was going in to get fixed up very soon. Since then, I've kept in touch with Calvin, and I keep asking him if his bike has been serviced, but every time his plans fall through. So I made him a deal. I asked him for a list of problems with the bike, and I offered to buy all the parts and do all the work if I get to make a video about it. It's a win-win scenario. His bike gets fixed up a bit, and I get to make Gixxer jokes. Make a video.
This is the list of issues Calvin gave me. It needs an oil change, a brake bleed, possibly new brake pads, the chain desperately needs to be adjusted, and he'd like it raised back up to normal height.
But I think the first order of business should be to take this bike around the block to see if there are any other surprises. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit scared, especially with those brakes. I am short and this bike makes me feel like a midget. I'm flat-footed with a bent knee. That never happens to me. Watch this, it's got cruise control. How fancy is that? Not a technological advancement, it's just the grip is put on over the bar end, so it just sticks. That's very safe. Okay, it's time, we need to try the brakes. Oh my. So I basically just squeeze my fingers on the throttle between the throttle and the lever. So you have to use like a full hand just to brake. So safe. Let's try the back one. Oh, that sticks. Ugh. Okay, the back one requires a lot of force, but it works. Another interesting quirk is that the speed and the distance is in miles, but the temperature is in Celsius. So that's pretty confused, but hopefully we will be able to swap it back into kilometers per hour since that's what we use here. The gear changes are also awful, but I think that's just because the chain is so loose. So let's get it back to the workshop and see what we can do with it in less than 72 hours, because I might have been messing around now. Other than that, I want to check the air filter, pump the tires, and give it a wash, a bit of a deep clean. The good news is that it kept the coolant temperature stable while riding, and I can even see the coolant reservoir from here, which is full. As for tires, the tread on them still looks very good, but the rear tire is very square and kind of looks like somebody did a burnout on it. It didn't feel too bad while riding, and Calvin said that he mostly just rides around town and does some freeway miles, so I don't think it's super necessary to go out and buy brand new expensive sporty tires for that. I also just realized that this is a terrible week for this because today is a holiday, so all the bike shops are closed, which means I can't buy new parts. But I don't have much time to waste, so I'm going to try to do as much as possible today without new parts, and tomorrow we'll go shopping.
I figured giving the neglected areas a wash was a good place to start. It also has this cool feature where it needs a steel rod slid through the axle to sit on a paddock stand, because somehow both spool threads have been snapped off the swing arm. But hey, it works. Then anywhere that gets excessively dirty, whether it's just a linkage, an oily chain or dusty brakes, got covered in degreaser before the rest of the bike got a layer of snow foam. And I know you were expecting the normal attire to wash a Gixxer, aka a mankini, but unfortunately I couldn't find mine, but I promise to be better next time. A chain brush easily loosened the grime on the chain, and then I was able to just wipe it off with a cloth. The linkage is another area often overlooked, but even that cleaned up nicely.
Okay, so now that we got some of the dirt and grease off of the bike, it'll be more pleasant to work on, but something's bothering me. It's in miles per hour, and I'm pretty sure it could be a really quick and easy fix if it is possible. So I've been browsing some forums and I've got something to try. One guy was suggesting this, with the bike turned on and it in the odometer page, not either of the trips. You can see here it's in miles per hour. So he suggested that you just hold down both of these buttons while on the odometer and it should switch over to KPH. What do you know? Sorry, Calvin, I added quite a few numbers to your odometer, but you can see in the top corner it says kilometers per hour now, which is way better. I'm hoping the next quick fix is this sticky throttle. Now, some people think that it's cool when a throttle sticks because it sort of acts as cruise control. So when you're going down the freeway and you're too lazy to hold your throttle open for hours on end, you do something stupid like this. Let's try this. I see why the grip slid down now. Look at this, it just spins. So let's take this off rather and clean it properly. Not sure why I'm using compressed air, I don't think it needs it. Now I'm just going to use some alcohol to clean any oils off of here, and because it's alcohol, it'll also just evaporate, so it should leave nothing behind but a nice grippy surface, and hopefully that does the job.
I also made sure to clean the grip itself, but then struggled to get it back on.
It's always a good sign if you struggle to get it on, because then it means it probably won't slip. It's like a real motorbike. It returns to the start, and no matter how hard you twist, the grip doesn't spin. On the clutch side, the clutch doesn't feel too bad, but it does feel a little gummy or sticky. So I've got my cable luber and I'm just gonna give it a quick lube. There's a Gixxer joke in there somewhere, but it should help this cable to last longer, and it is a great thing to do on older bikes that have older cables. The first thing we need to do is just wind the clutch cable all the way in, probably not that far, so we can get to the gap and remove the cable itself. And you can see just how dirty this is here. And this is the stuff we want to get out of there so that it moves freely. Now we're going to take the cable lubing tool, put it over the cable, put the end of the housing just inside it and tighten it up. Now this is proper cable lube, so it won't gum up inside at all and will actually help. We're just going to put the nozzle in the little hole here and spray. We are getting some leakage, but we're going to keep going until it starts coming out the other end of the cable. And don't worry, I put the cable tie there to make my job a bit easier because I'm lazy, but watch this. We should probably have washed the bike after this. Can you see the color of the liquid coming out of here? Look at the floor. This is all from inside that cable housing. Much better. And yes, I probably used way too much lube, but Gixxer riders are used to.
Then I could turn my attention to the chain.
Here's a 36. Perfect. How is that the same size as my R1? Gixxer riders always overcompensating for something.
So I fiddled a bit more and thought it was perfect.
So one of the best reasons to have your chain at the correct tension from a selfish point of view is just because your gear changes will feel a lot better. And they were damn it, it's still loose. They were feeling sloppy on my ride, so I imagine they will feel better eventually, but we need to go even further back.
And this is why I hate adjusting chains.
Okay, you're my witness. Much better, right? So it probably looks like all I've done today is faff around, but when you're filming things, everything takes about 3 times longer. And to be honest, I'm tired. Bike shops have finally come out of their coma so that I can buy some parts. So in my cup holder, I've got some brake fluid. I've also got a brand new oil filter with a new crush washer inside. A new air filter because we're just going to assume that the one in the bike is dirty, and I hope it's not a washable one and I've just wasted money. And of course, some new brake pads for the front.
The only thing that we're missing are brake pads for the rear, and those are the ones that we actually need more desperately. I don't think we need front ones, but we're going to do it anyway because this is what we're doing. But the guy at the bike shop said that they're supposedly getting a new order of brake pads either later today or tomorrow morning. So he'll give me a call and hopefully we'll still have time to get them done. The brakes were a nightmare I should have seen coming. I figured I'd start by cleaning out the calipers, then give them a quick bleed and I'd be done. My only fear was that I'd need a seal kit because I wouldn't be able to source that in such limited time. The good news is that I found the problem. The bad news is I'm not really sure how to fix it. So you can see that this caliper's been painted, which I mean personally I think looks awful. You can see on the back here they've even painted the retaining clip. So a very professional job. And the bolt there. But the worst part is that they've even managed to get paint on the pistons. So you can see that on this, or the right hand side, I can't point at the moment, those are working. The top one there is the freest moving one, the bottom one does move. But on this side, these two are pretty seized. They don't want to move. And I suspect it's because they've been pushed back with the paint. The paint now makes them thicker and now they can't move. So I can take this caliper off and try to remove the pistons and clean them up, but I'm scared that then the seals fall apart. And like I said, I don't think I can get seals on short notice. But instead, I took a different approach. I loosely put the caliper back together and decided to bleed the brakes, because if I can get enough pressure in the system, I can force the pistons out just enough to clean them without having to remove them entirely. I got a ton of air out of the lines, which was actually a good sign. Then I came up with some creative ways to coax all the pistons out, which allowed me to gently clean the paint off the pistons the best I could with a copper brush. And an hour later, I finally convinced all the pistons to help out, which meant it was finally time for new pads. There was enough material left on the old pads, but I took a few chunks out of them while prying them apart so many times. The other side had been painted the same way, but fortunately it took a bit less effort to get the pistons moving again. Okay, so everything is back together. I've got the new pads in this side. I gave the system another quick bleed and more air came out of it, including the bleed nipple on the master cylinder here. Even the reservoir is filled up, closed up, and now look at this. The lever pulls like a real motorcycle. I think that is going to feel a lot better. Now we got to move on to the back brake because this lever hardly moves. This time I started by bleeding the system, although Suzuki make this reservoir harder to get to for some reason. I guess they know Gixxers aren't fast enough to need brakes anyway, and then it was time to clean once again. I ended up taking this piston out entirely because I could see a seal sticking out, but this did make cleaning the piston easier. I also buffed the pin that the pads ride on in the hopes that everything would be able to move with less effort. And finally, I installed some new brake pads before bleeding the system from dry. It's hard to tell in here if that brake lever is better or if it's my imagination, but we'll find out soon enough when we get to take it for a ride. Luckily, I went in search of the oil drain bolt and filter before warming up the bike, because the fairings had been installed in such a creative fashion that it took me a while to figure out. Let's just say I used my wire cutters on zip ties more than my Allen keys on bolts. I even pulled a rookie Gixxer rider move and dropped the drain bolt in the oil, but I tried to make up for it by using a Gixxer rider's favorite tool. And I actually got lucky here because Calvin already had some oil for the bike. It has been opened, but there's more than enough in here to fill the bike up. Everyone knows that all Gixxers take 420 liters of oil, so with that taken care of, I could swap out the air filter. So the irony is that it actually did have a washable air filter in it, so I didn't need to buy this one. This is a Samota. I've never actually heard of them.
It's a very pretty color though. It is, however, very grubby between all the fins here. So I think I'm just going to install the new one that I bought. I'll give this one back to Calvin and he can wash it and have it ready for the next time he needs to change the air filter. If you're worried about performance, buy a liter bike. If you're wondering why I haven't put the side panel back on yet, it's partly because it was MacGyvered on there and I'm not looking forward to trying to get it back on that same way, but also because the last real job we have to try and do is to raise the bike up a bit. And if my stand doesn't work under the triple clamp, we're going to have to jack it up underneath the headers, so we need them to be exposed. Now usually I'm very against lowering bikes. Some guys think it looks cool if you lower the front end by raising the forks up in the clamps so that it's close to the front mudguard. But all you're really doing is changing the geometry of the bike and ruining the handling. This one has actually been lowered front and back. It's got a lowering linkage on the rear shock. So the whole bike is being lowered for someone that was obviously too short to ride it. So that's at least a real reason to lower it. But Calvin isn't, okay, he is short, he's like my height, but he's not this short. He can ride a normal height GSXR. So let's try and get it back to that.
As always, it took some faffing, but I did manage to get my triple clamp stand to work. So all I had to do was loosen off the top and bottom triple clamp bolts, as well as the clip-ons, and then I could slowly wiggle the forks back down in the clamps to raise the front end.
So all that's left to do is adjust the rear linkage to match the front height and we're done. Except I just realized that I didn't actually look at this linkage properly beforehand. I saw that it had a threaded rod, so I assumed that you could sort of wind it in to raise the back of the bike. But now looking a bit closer at it, I don't think there's a way to wind it in or out. I assume this rod is all the way to the end on each side, and there's not actually any way to make this shorter. So that means all I've actually done now is exactly what I was complaining about and messing with the geometry of the bike. But I'm gonna put the fairings back on and take it for a ride tomorrow, and then we'll go from there. It's day 3, which means that today we've got to get the bike back to Calvin. Luckily, I got quite a lot done yesterday, so all I did this morning was put some air in the tires, some lube on the chain, and obviously now we've got to test ride it. Oh my goodness, it feels so much better to have brakes. I even know how far I've gone in a metric that makes sense to me, aka metric. But yeah, I mean, we're not damaging the engine, we got fresh oil in it. We don't have cruise control anymore, that sucks, we lost the feature. And our gear changes are crispy once again. In fact, it's so much fun to ride now, we ran out of road. As for the ride height, I left the forks where I put them higher because to me, it still feels better having the front end at a normal height. It honestly doesn't feel that abnormal, it hasn't destroyed the handling, and at least if Calvin does decide to get a stock rear linkage at some point, now half the job is done for him. I would have loved to gone searching for some second-hand brake calipers to replace these, as well as to steal the stock linkage off of a crashed bike, but there just wasn't time for that.
Unfortunately, with more time and more money, I could have done a lot more for this Gixxer. But all things considered, I think it's a lot better off than 72 hours ago, so it was time to return the bike. Calvin was super happy to have his bike back and ecstatic to have brakes, even while just pushing it around.
But anyway, it was actually fun to use all my tools on somebody else's bike. So leave all your Gixxer jokes down in the comments and I'll see you on the next ride.